Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze how James Maddison created tactical issues for Pep Guardiola and Leicester City's 1-0 win over Man City. So when we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Man City starting in a 4-3-3 with a makeshift lineup, and we have Leicester City starting in a 4-2-3-1. So first, we're going to break down how both sides look to disrupt the other from creating chances, and then we'll focus on how Maddison was able to receive the ball between the lines to create chances. So first we'll focus on how Man City were looking to attack, and what you ended up seeing was that in that 4-3-3, they had the wide players in Mahrez and Edozie hugging the touchline, and then Ferran Torres was occupying the two center backs. Initially, you would expect Ferran Torres to make runs in between the center backs and in the gaps between the center backs and the full backs, but what we ended up seeing from him was that he was dropping off deeper to check in towards the ball to pull out a Marte, and then he was looking to spin across the center back to break in behind. Here you can see Ake stepping forward ahead of Leicester, dropping off into that 4-4-2 out of possession, and that's where you could see Ferran Torres looking to drop towards the halfway circle in between Tielemans and Ndidi. What happens next is that you could see a Marti stepping towards Ferran Torres, and that's where you end up seeing him prepare to make the run off of his shoulder to break in behind. However, unfortunately for Ferran Torres, Ake looks to play a safe pass into Benjamin Mendy. In terms of City's build-up, what you ended up seeing was that the fullbacks were very narrow, and then you had Palmer and Gundogan pushing into gaps of space between Barnes and Ndidi, and Tielemans and Ayoze Perez to receive the ball in the half spaces, but it also ensured that there was a pathway to slide the ball out into those wider areas. Ultimately, when you look at City's shape, it was more of a 4-1-5, but there were times where Benjamin Mendy did tuck in narrow, sometimes even towards the halfway circle, and that's when it did shift into more of a 3-2-5. Nevertheless, when you focus on how Leicester disrupted City's build-up, they dropped off into two narrow banks of four, but they pressed higher up the pitch with their front four. So you had Vardy and Maddison sitting in between Fernandinho, and then you would see Barnes and Ayoze Perez stepping forward to close down Cancelo and Mendy when they were adopting those narrow positions. Ultimately, what you end up seeing is that it is a hexagonal shape around Fernandinho to ensure that he can't dictate the tempo of the game from those deeper positions. And that's ultimately what Leicester City wanted. So at times it did look like a 4-2-4, but for the most part it was a 4-4-2 out of possession. And then from there it was pretty simple. If Vardy stepped to Ake, Maddison would be tasked with dealing with Fernandinho, and if Maddison pushed forward on Ruben Diaz, then Vardy would sit on Fernandinho and vice versa. Here you can see an example of that hexagonal shape around Fernandinho, as Vardy steps towards Ruben Diaz but is blocking off the passing lane into him, and Maddison is looking to shift towards Fernandinho, and you could see both Cancelo and Mendy in a narrow position. That's often where you ended up seeing Palmer pushing forward into that gap of space just ahead of Bertrand and Soyuncu, and Gundogan was shifting towards the outside of Perez to receive the ball as Mendy was tucking in narrow, and that would allow him to facilitate it out to Edozie to go 1v1 with Ricardo Pereira. Here's an example of Ake carrying the ball into Leicester City's half, and you could see Benjamin Mendy occupying Tielemans, Ayoze Perez also in a narrow position with Gundogan just in behind him, and that's the passing lane that Ake now has to slide the ball out to the wide player. What you'd also see down that left-hand side is when the ball was shifted out to Edozie near the left touchline. What would happen then is that Benjamin Mendy would make a run from those central positions, and it would be an underlapping run beyond Tielemans and Perez, and he would attempt to receive the ball behind Ricardo Pereira, but Amarty often did a very good job of tracking that movement. And there were even times where they had Ayoze Perez stepping towards the center backs, and if the ball was shifted out into those wider areas, then Tielemans would push forward to cover for him while Ndidi shifted central. Meanwhile, when we focus on the opposite side of the pitch, this was a bit more straightforward for City. They had Ferran Torres stepping towards Amarty, and then they had Palmer shifting from a midfield zone to help with the press, and he would close down Soyuncu. But when he did close down the Leicester City center back, he would be looking to block off the passing lane into Ndidi. That leaves you with Gundogan against Tielemans in that midfield zone, and then Fernandinho had to deal with the task of dealing with Maddison. Here you could see Ferran Torres stepping towards Amarty but blocking off the passing lane into Tielemans, and Gundogan is also stepping forward to apply pressure, while you end up seeing Palmer dropping off Soyuncu to close down Ndidi, and then you have Edozie near Ricardo Pereira. But this is ideally what you expected from City. You had Ferran Torres near Amarty, you had Palmer blocking off the passing lane into Ndidi but prepared to step out to Soyuncu, Edozie was focused on Ricardo Pereira, and then you had Mahrez just ahead of Bertrand. Whereas in the midfield zone, Fernandinho and Gundogan were prepared to sweep up mistakes if the ball was played into that central area. Ideally, if Soyuncu's on the ball, what you end up seeing is Palmer dropping off to deal with Ndidi, you have Gundogan stepping into the path of Tielemans, and then you could see Maddison shifting towards the right of Fernandinho, attempting to receive the ball between the lines. The other issue that Man City did encounter was that Jose Perez at times was shifting laterally into those pockets of space to attempt to overload that central area, and Mendy wasn't tracking his movement. The other interesting components to how Leicester was looking to attack was at times you would see Ndidi dropping off into that half space zone, and then you would see Bertrand pushing forward to get into attacking positions, and the same thing applied on the opposite flank with Tielemans dropping deeper into that half space, and then you would end up seeing Ricardo Pereira looking to make runs off Benjamin Mendy. But when you focus on the main tactical theme of this game, it was Maddison looking to shift to the right of Fernandinho to get on the ball in pockets of space, and there were times where Guardiola's men simply didn't apply enough pressure on the ball, and Maddison's teammates were able to find him in those zones, and he was able to turn to create attacks. In other situations, if they looked to play long, you would see Maddison making runs off Fernandinho into those attacking zones, but that didn't manifest into legitimate goal-scoring chances. And then you could look to times where he would drop off deeper just ahead of the midfield bank. None of the City midfielders would apply pressure quick enough, and he was able to play long balls into Bertrand or Ricardo Pereira making runs in behind. Here you can see Ndidi on the ball just ahead of the halfway circle with Palmer stepping out late, but focus on Maddison dropping off into that zone unmarked. Ndidi bypasses Palmer and plays the ball into Maddison, and that's where you see Fernandinho not stepping, but focus on the movement of other players. Jose Perez is in that halfway circle free, Tielemans drops off into the inside right position, and that allows Maddison to clip the ball over Mendy to allow Ricardo Pereira to break into right half space. What happens next is that Pereira ends up going 1v1 with Mendy, but look at the gap available in right half space for Tielemans to make a late run into the box. When Tielemans receives the pullback, he's unmarked, and that's where you end up seeing Jose Perez making a run across Fernandinho now. Tielemans sweeps a first-time ball into that zone, and from this position, you should expect Jose Perez to finish to put Leicester up 1-0, but he ends up firing a tame effort at the keeper. Here you can see Gundogan applying pressure late towards Tielemans in the halfway circle, but focus on Ndidi's position in an inside left position in his half, and then you could see Jose Perez and Maddison between the lines. Gundogan ends up sliding the ball across Palmer, and that's where you see Perez prepared to play a short pass into the path of Maddison as Fernandinho isn't tight on him in that zone. When the ball is played in towards Maddison, he lets it roll across his body, and before Palmer and Fernandinho can apply pressure, he's looking to split Cancelo and Ruben Dias to find Vardy making a run in between the center backs, but unfortunately for Brendan Rodgers here, Maddison's pass is slightly overhit, and it allows Ake to shield it away from Vardy. If we quickly shift to Perez, you end up seeing Tielemans receiving a short pass from Ndidi just near the halfway circle, and now he's looking to split Fernandinho and Gundogan to find Jose Perez between the lines. When Perez receives that ball, that's where you instantly see Vardy making a run in that gap between Cancelo and Ruben Dias. Similar to Maddison, Perez instantly slides the ball to Vardy, and he does well to get his first touch just ahead of Cancelo, although he doesn't bring the ball in towards left half space, and that's simply enough for him to get the ball just across Ruben Dias and fire a low shot on goal that's pushed away. If we quickly shift back to Maddison, you could see Ndidi carrying the ball towards the halfway line, and either Fernandinho, Mahrez, or Mendy look to apply pressure. That allows Ndidi to slide the ball across Fernandinho as Maddison does call for it to the left of him. And because Ake doesn't step and he retreats, that allows Maddison to turn and locate the run of Vardy in between the center backs towards the right channel. Maddison plays a reverse ball across Ake, and that presents Vardy in a 1v1 position with Ruben Dias ahead of the City box. What happens next is Ruben Dias does very well to ensure that Vardy can't cut central, and he forces Vardy towards right half space, and this is simply good defending from Ruben Dias as he blocks Vardy's effort on goal. And minutes later, it's Tielemans carrying the ball towards the halfway line with Palmer applying pressure just behind him, and you could see neither Fernandinho or Mahrez applying pressure. Tielemans ends up splitting both City players and it falls into the path of Maddison between the lines, and that's where he instantly sees Vardy making a run between the center backs, and neither of the City defenders look to step towards him. Because Maddison's first touch is poor, Vardy does run offside, and it presents him in a position where he has Jose Perez, Bertrand, and Barnes level with him, so there's no passing options forward. So that results in Maddison carrying the ball forward and dragging a shot from distance inches wide of the net. So as you can see, although a defensive mistake proved costly for Pep Guardiola's side, the Man City manager failed to find a solution for Maddison's impact between the lines, as the Leicester City number 10 was the game's most influential player. Hi everybody, thanks for watching and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the Interview show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the Interviews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.